Welcome to Torah Today Ministries and our continuing series Tehillim Talks, our studies in the Psalms. And in this episode, we're looking at Psalm 44. Now, this psalm at first blush seems pretty typical of many of the Psalms where the writer kind of bemoans the things they're going through but looks to God and hope that He'll deliver them and so on. But as you look a little deeper, there's more going on than this. In fact, this psalm is very particular and very unusual in one regard. So unusual, in fact, that Paul chooses to quote this psalm over in Romans 8, and something he wants to teach the people in Rome, the believers in Rome, who are going through something very similar as to what is described here in Psalm 44. So let's get started. This is another psalm written by the sons of Korah, and it is a Masal, which means that more than praise or prayer or pleading, it's a teaching psalm. And there's a lesson to be learned here. So our job is to learn the lesson that is being taught by this psalm. Now, this psalm divides itself pretty conveniently into three sections. And I've entitled these sections the past, and then the future, and then the present. Now, I know you're thinking, well, that's out of order. Yes, it is. But what the psalmist is doing is he's looking to the past and looking to the future, and he's fine with those. Those are great. But it's the present that's really the problem. And isn't that kind of the case with all of us as well? Well, let's dive in. Verses 1 through 3. O God, we have heard with our ears. Our fathers have told us what deeds you performed in their days, in the days of old. So the fathers here can refer to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also to those who went out with Moses in the Exodus and through the wilderness and went on to conquer the land of Canaan. You, verse 2, with your own hand drove out the nations, but them you planted. You afflicted the peoples, but them, the fathers, you set free. For not by their sword did they inherit the land, nor did their own arm save them, but your right hand and your arm and the light of your face, for you delighted in them. So looking at the past, it's all good. Even though there was a lot of pain in the past, what remains is the sense of history and victory and deliverance that God had performed. And then the psalmist moves on to the future. Now, even though verses 4 through 8 are written kind of in the present tense and refer to the past, the tone, especially in the closing part of this section, is definitely towards the future. For you are my king, O God, ordain salvations for Jacob. Through you we gore our foes. Through your name we trample those who rise up against us. For not in my bow do I trust, nor can my sword save me, but you have saved us from our foes and have put to shame those who hate us. God, we praise continually, and we will give thanks to your name forever. So here now, instead of speaking of the fathers and what God has done for them in the past, it's now speaking about me and about us. It keeps switching between the singular and the plural. And it ends with, we praise continually, God, we praise continually, and we will give thanks to your name forever. But then we come to the present. Now see if you can notice something unusual about the present here. But you have rejected us and disgraced us and have not gone out with our armies. You have made us turn back from the foe, and those who hate us have gotten spoil. You have made us like sheep for slaughter and have scattered us among the nations. You have sold your people for trifle, demanding no high price for them. You have made us the taunt of our neighbors, the derision and scorn of those around us. You have made us a byword among the nations, a laughingstock among the peoples. All day long my disgrace is before me, and shame has covered my face. At the sound of the taunter and reviler, at the sight of the enemy and the avenger. Now, so far in this third section, it's kind of similar to other psalms that are bemoaning the things they're going through and how they're being exiled and being traumatized by their enemies, and there's no victory. But the surprise is still yet to come. But before we get there, I want to talk about this word byword. It's not a very common word in modern English usage, but the word there in Hebrew is the word Masal. And this word may be familiar to you because Masal is usually translated a parable or a proverb. Now, Yeshua told parables and Solomon gave us proverbs, but in Hebrew they're the same word, Masal. In fact, the book of Proverbs is called Mishlei Shlomo, the Proverbs, the Mashals of Solomon. But how can parable and proverb also be the same same word as to rule? Well, the rabbis describe a proverb, a mashal, as like a handle on a bucket. Now, picture this with me. You have a bucket that's brimful with water, and you want to carry this bucket from one place to another, but there's no handle on the bucket. So you take this and you hug it to your chest and you walk as carefully as you can, but with every step the water sloshes and spills over and some of it is lost. Now imagine putting a handle on that bucket. It puts you in control of the contents of the bucket. And you can swing the bucket, you can spin it around, and not a drop is lost. So a mashal allows you to rule over a body of truth. This is why a proverb or a parable, a little short story, if you learn it, it's like it gives you a handle on a large body of truth without spilling a drop. You know, in the first chapter of Genesis, it describes the fourth day of creation, when God put the sun and the moon in the sky, and he put the sun, the greater light, and the moon, the lesser light, to mashal over the day and to mashal over the night. So as the sun and the moon rule over the day and night, and what does that mean to rule? What does that mean to mashal? It means it brings clarity. The daytime, the sun brings us great clarity to where we can understand and embrace and see and comprehend the world around us. And the moon does that in varying degrees at night. They are both are described as mashaling, so to speak, over the day and night, just as the parable or proverb allows you to mashal over a body of truth. You can comprehend it, you can see it, you can carry it, you don't lose anything. So going back to the context here, the psalmist has been bemoaning the fact that God, you have made us a mashal among the nations. No, it's sad and it's upsetting to me when I hear people who don't know better use the word Jew in a derogatory sense. And this is a fulfillment of this verse here. You've made us a byword. And what I have found that is almost every single time I hear someone called a Jew in a derogatory sense, it's unfair and it's inaccurate and it's wrong. Because my experiences with the Jewish people have always been very positive, where they've been very generous, very kind, very wise. I'm sure there are exceptions. I know there are historically. But in general, meeting a Jewish person, I meet someone who's very focused, but also very upright, very straightforward. But there are other people in history, when you call someone a Hitler, Hitler's become a byword, and that's something we never want to call one another. And you call someone a little Napoleon, or they have a Napoleon complex, you've made Napoleon a byword. And we can think of other villains through history we've made into bywords. But here the psalmist is so upset that the word Jew, the word Israel, has become a byword. Well, let's continue. And you can see already that the bulk of this psalm has to do with the present conditions. So we continue with verse 17. All this has come upon us, though we have not forgotten you, and we have not been false to your covenant. Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from your way. This is the surprise. Because most psalms that decry the conditions that Israel's going through, and they talk about how they've been exiled, how they've been unvictorious in battle, and they bemoan all the ills they're going through. There's a confession that we've forgotten your covenant, we've broken your commandments, we have neglected your statutes, we've worshipped other gods, we've done these horrible things. But not this psalm. In this psalm, again, he says, we've not forgotten you. We have not been false to your covenant. Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from your way. In other words, we've been doing things right. But how come things feel so wrong? How come we're suffering the way we are? Why do you feel so distant? Let's continue. Verse 19. Yet you have broken us in the place of jackals and covered us with the shadow of death. If we had forgotten the name of our God or spread out our hands to a foreign God, would not God discover this? In other words, wouldn't he notice that and correct us and bring repentance and then restore his presence to us? For he knows the secrets of the heart. Yet for your sake we are killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. And this is the verse 22, that Paul quotes over in Romans 8. Because the experience that the sons of Korah are describing here in Psalm 44 was also the experience being experienced by the believers in Rome when Paul wrote his letter to them. They were doing things right, and that they were experiencing great suffering. Let's go ahead and finish the last verses of the psalm. Awake, why are you sleeping, O Lord? And of course, God never slumbers or sleeps, but it seems that way. Rouse yourself. Do not reject us forever. Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget our affliction and oppression? For our soul is bowed down to the dust. Our belly clings to the ground. Rise up, come to our help. Redeem us for the sake of your steadfast love. So here, the psalmist looked to the past and the great victories that God brought in the past. They look to the future. They know that the story has a happy ending. They know that God's kingdom is coming to earth, that King Messiah will rule. And then after that, there'll be the new heavens and new earth. And as believers in Yeshua, we know that he serves the best wine last. The best is yet to come. So we have a glorious past, we have a glorious future, but right now, things just seem completely upside down, so mixed up. There's so much unfair suffering we're going through. And so no wonder Paul quotes this psalm when he writes to the Romans in Romans chapter 8. We'll start with verse 31, and this is what Paul wrote. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Now, a couple things that he's alluding to here. There are people who were against the believers in Rome. They were under a terrible circumstance because you could, of course, legally be a Jew. The Jews had a sanction from Rome that they could practice Judaism. They were the only religion in the ancient Roman Empire that was allowed to practice its own religion inside the Roman Empire. It was the law that everyone else had to worship the gods of Rome. In other words, you either were a Jew or converted to Judaism, or you had to practice the pagan religions of Rome. Where did that leave the Gentile believers who did not convert to Judaism, but they reject the pagan religion of Rome? It put them in a place where to be loyal to God, they had to do something completely illegal, something that could and often did cost them their lives. So he asks a question, Paul does. Who can be against us? Well, pretty much the whole Roman Empire. But he reminds them, but God is for us. And if God's for us, what difference does it make if Rome is against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. Now, think about that for a second. Yeshua came, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Son of God, the Messiah of Israel. And yet he was rejected and put to death completely unfairly, falsely accused and persecuted. But God didn't spare him. He allowed him to die. But he says, but the one who gave us his own son, will he not also graciously give us all things? Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? Messiah Yeshua is the one who died. In other words, no matter how much the Roman government brings charges against you, no matter how much others condemn you, don't worry about it. Because our God and our Messiah have the last word. Messiah Yeshua is the one who died, more than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Messiah? Shall tribulation, and there was plenty of tribulation, or distress, there was definitely a lot of stress, or persecution, there was definitely persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or danger, or sword, and there were all those things that the believers in Rome were facing. And then here Paul quotes Psalm 44. As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. But Paul brings the rest of the story. He says, no, and all these things, even though we're being killed all the day long, even though we're like sheep being slaughtered, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor things present nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation. And that pretty much covers everything, doesn't it? But none of these things will be able to separate us from the love of God in Messiah Yeshua, our Master. What's he really saying here? I think it's this. In this world, everyone suffers. Everybody suffers. And the more wicked and foolish we are, and the more suffering we bring on ourselves through our own rotten decisions. And the more righteous we are, generally there's less suffering because we're at least not suffering for our own foolish decisions. But nevertheless, righteous or unrighteous, we all suffer. And we all suffer because of the unrighteousness of others. We all suffer because of the unrighteousness of others. When someone runs a red light, or they rear end you in the car because they're texting, because they're running from the law or whatever, you suffer because of their unrighteousness. We all pay higher prices in the stores to cover the cost of the shoplifters. Because people steal from the stores, prices must be raised to cover the theft, and we are the ones who pay the higher prices. When a foolish and wicked leader is elected to office, we all suffer because of his or her foolishness and wickedness. We all suffer because of others. If you don't believe that, look at Yeshua. He didn't suffer for his own sin because he had no sin. He was perfectly righteous. But he suffered for our sin, for the sins of the world. He laid down his life. And so Paul is reminding us, you can be doing everything right. but you may still suffer. But there's something else buried here in what Paul writes in Romans 8. He's basically saying we're all going to die. No one gets out of this world alive. So if we're going to die anyway, let's die for righteousness' sake. Let's not die of old age because we denied God so we wouldn't be persecuted. But if we have to die younger because we confess who God is, and that we follow him, and we are persecuted and executed for our faith, then let's go out that way. And he says that even in this, we are more than conquerors because we died on the victorious side. We laid down our lives for the winning team. And God and our Redeemer, they resurrect us. And there's an eternal reward and an eternal weight of glory that's given us for living our lives for him. I'm reminded of the words of George MacDonald, one of my favorite authors. In fact, I can look up and see his works up on the shelf right behind the camera here. And one of the things he said that's always stuck with me is this. He said that the Savior did not come and suffer and die so that we would not have to suffer and die, but so that our deaths could be like his. And in other words, our suffering and our death have purpose. So if we're all going to suffer in this world, whether you're righteous or unrighteous, let's suffer for the sake of righteousness' sake. If we're all going to die, then let's die for the sake of righteousness. We all have to go through stuff. Let's go through it because we're following God. We're following him. And this is actually, though it may look like the path of loss, it's actually the path of victory. And I think it's appropriate to close with Yeshua's final beatitude in Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. He says, "Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men cast insults at you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me." And what's our response to be? Again, he says, "Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So we have a glorious past, an even more glorious future. But right now we all feel pain. Right now everything looks confusing. Sometimes things look pretty awful. But even in the midst of that, there can be great joy and great rejoicing. And like the woman of valor, we can laugh at the future. But there will be suffering. So let's just make sure that the suffering we go through is for the sake of righteousness. And with that, I wish you shalom and may God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.
That's all, folks.